My name is Diana Waring, and I'm glad you're here. Today, I want to talk about what it means to see God's fingerprints in history. And since that is such a difficult, even controversial subject, I'd like to start with an analogy that can help explain what it means to see the invisible God's fingerprints. One of my favorite hobbies is land-based whale watching. That means you're not on a boat chasing down whales. Instead, you're standing on the coast waiting for whales to swim by. It's best to do this in places where whales are commonly seen and at the time of year they normally appear. With your binoculars ready, you scan the surface of the ocean over and over and over again, watching patiently for evidence of whales. Whale spouts, which look like puffs of white smoke, whale flukes, dorsal fins, even a whale breaching when they jump out of the water. Here's the deal. The whales are in the ocean. It's guaranteed. That's where they live. But you aren't necessarily standing in the right place at this moment. You may spend all day watching, yet never see one. But the reason it's such a compelling and joyous hobby is that from time to time, you see clear and unmistakable evidence of a whale right out there. It's absolutely incredible. In the same way, as Christians, we know God as Emmanuel, God with us. The Bible speaks over and over again of his faithfulness, that he leads his people, that he provides. You probably recognize to some extent his work in your life because you see evidence of it. But can we see this in history? Could we possibly see evidence beyond the time of the Old and New Testament for God's work in our world? The answer is yes. Just like with land-based whale watching, occasionally, from time to time and place to place, through much study and diligent research, there are breathtaking glimpses of his faithfulness, of his perfect timing, of his incredible kindness in history. And in the same way that land-based whale watching requires you to stand on land and look out to water, so watching for God's fingerprints in history requires us to stand on the accumulated data of history and then look out to church history to see these specific moments of God working in our world. Here's an example of what I mean. In 1857 in America, things were very difficult. This was the year of the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court ruled that no one of African ancestry could claim the rights of U.S. citizenship, that they were outside the bounds of the Constitution. The issue of slavery had already been hotly debated, with anger and hatred and violence growing across regional lines. This court decision enraged public opinion in many areas and increased the deep division between northern and southern states. It would be only 4 years later that civil war would engulf the country. To add additional misery to the mix, there was also a huge economic crash in 1857, the third great panic in American history, where people lost everything. Factories closed, huge numbers were unemployed. In New York City alone, there were over 30,000 unemployed. Fear, uncertainty, unrest, violence. Sound familiar? But as we gaze in this historic moment at church history, we see something amazing. In this same year, Jeremiah Lanphier, a man working for the Dutch Reformed North Church in New York City, felt a deep burden to hold weekly noon prayer meetings in his neighborhood. So he put up advertisements welcoming merchants, mechanics, clerks, strangers, and businessmen generally, an opportunity to stop and call upon God amid the perplexities of their work. He added, "It will continue for 1 hour, but it's also designed for those who may find it inconvenient to remain more than 5 or 10 minutes, as well as for those who can spare the whole hour." On September 23, 1857, at noon, Mr. Lanphier waited for people to show up for the first prayer meeting. No one came, at least not until 12:30. Then one person walked in, followed by another, and then another. In all, there were 6 people at that first prayer meeting. On the following Wednesday at noon, 20 people showed up. The third Wednesday, there were 40. Within 6 months, 10,000 were gathering daily for prayer in New York City. And it didn't stop there. Prayer meetings began forming throughout the rest of the United States, north and south. Within 2 years, more than 1 million converts had been added to the churches. It crossed denominational lines. It crossed regional lines. It crossed racial lines. It crossed oceans, east and west. People were being deeply impacted. Lives were being radically changed. And an awareness of God's reality in everyday life was deepening. This great prayer revival is one of those moments when we glimpse the fingerprints of God in human history. Just prior to the deadliest war America would fight, its own civil war, there was this extraordinary move of God bringing comfort and hope and new life. Seeing history with, can I say, binoculars of faith, is life-changing and faith-building. That's why it's so important. And that's why I included stories of these fingerprints of God throughout my History Revealed curriculum. See you next time.